you, and thank you for those joining us today, and welcome to those who join us at some stage when this goes into our virtual world that we've all been living in more intensely over this last 12 months. I'm Stephen, I'm the Executive Chair of FinTech Scotland, and I thought it'd be, rather than just hearing from me about obviously how the FinTech community and cluster is developing in Scotland, I'd bring along two people amongst many that I've really been inspired by in terms of the work that they do, really, that you're actually hearing from directly from some FinTech leaders, as I refer to them as well. So I'll just get Par, first of all, would you just like to introduce yourself as well to start off with?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi everyone, my name's Pardeep Cassells. I work for a company called Access FinTech in Glasgow. I've been there for 18 months. My background is outsourced middle office operations. So I actually came from a bank environment. I was there for about 10 years before moving into the FinTech space. I'm delighted to be here with you all today.
Great, thank you, Par. Thank you. And Janet.
Thank you, Stephen. Welcome everyone, and thanks for having us here, Neil. I'm Janet. I'm currently in Accenture leading on major program deliveries within the financial sector, both in banking and in insurance as well. Mainly tech focused, but there's also been some business, people related and commercial projects and programs in there. Previously, I was with Lloyds Banking Group, and it was really there that I first saw the relationship between the larger retail banks and fintechs as well, which is something I'll explore later on here. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. And Jack, would you mind if I mention you are an entrepreneur, because you've got another business on the side, which isn't necessarily directly fintech, is it?
That's right, Stephen. So alongside my management consulting technology day job, I'm also trying to work on and build two different businesses, one that is more commercial e-commerce focused, and the other one a tech platform, ActivityPod, for the listing and booking of children's activities. So I'm very keenly interested in that entrepreneurship side of fintechs as well, which again we'll explore later.
So great. No, thank you, Pam. Thank you, Janet, as well. So just as a starter, really, and Neil mentioned at the start the government's overall agenda around this digital economy. And FinTech Scotland was created just over 3 years ago, with a view, from a financial innovation point of view, of it being part of that development of the digital economy, because money impacts all parts of our lives, as people, as families, communities, as businesses, large companies, small, across the piece. So, and that could always be done better, the way that money, and we engage with money. FinTech is all about reinventing the financial world to make it better for people, communities and business across the world. And we set up FinTech Scotland just over 3 years ago with a view, let's make Scotland one of the top global FinTech centres in the world. And here we are on that journey 3 years in, which maybe we'll come back to in just a moment. But in that 3 years, we have a community of enterprises, small, medium enterprises that are growing in FinTech innovation. That's gone from 26 when we started back 3 years ago to now over 150. In fact, you've probably seen the announcements today, the 151st firm has joined the community coming from Singapore. And Par will talk about her particular business, Access FinTech, which actually started in New York in a moment. So that's the community. In addition to that, what's important about what we're doing is about the collaboration. And this is particularly, we're hearing from Par and Janet about their work in the collaboration with large enterprises, getting those big organizations, like Janet mentioned, banks, to reinvent, to improve what they do using new technologies to improve the way that they deliver. So that collaboration between small entrepreneurs, like Pardeep and Janet, and big in reinventing what they do is a real part of our agenda at FinTech Scotland, and bringing that more to the fore. And the third part really about what we're doing in Scotland is develop what we call the cluster. And by cluster, we mean just getting as many people as possible to the party, the FinTech party. And whether that's consumers, investors, universities, students, everybody, nobody is excluded from being in this cluster. And that allows us to create something much more inclusive. And by having inclusivity, you have much more diversity, and diversity drives creativity and that opportunity for new ideas and new innovations. So that cluster we then connect to the rest of the world, both across to the UK. We work closely with our colleagues across the UK, but then across to the world. And maybe we'll touch on that, about that global connectivity, our links into Europe, Far East, the US and elsewhere. So community, growing, collaboration, developing, and cluster, part of a global fintech movement. So that's my little sort of intro, if I may. But I thought let's just get the flavour really from Par and Janet. Par, maybe just your sort of take. Obviously, as you mentioned, Access FinTech is fairly new into Scotland. Yeah. Maybe a little background as to why, how did you land in Glasgow?
So Access FinTech were founded in 2016. And we have existing offices in New York, as you rightly mentioned, in Tel Aviv, where most of our technology hub is at the moment, and in London. So I joined the organization, as I said, 18 months ago. And 18 months ago, I was the only employee of what we then called the Glasgow location. And everybody kind of said it with a bit of a chuckle. So Par, she heads up Access FinTech in Scotland. And the more that I got to know Access FinTech and the more I settled into the role, the more I promoted where I was from. So my view is that we have a really unique kind of melting pot of skills and expertise in Scotland. And so it didn't take a lot of conversations, to be honest. So when you start kind of making the point that, hang on, a lot of big banks have significantly sized offices across Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Dundee, and there's people there who have very varied skills. The first wave of people who were recruited in Scotland tended to be ops professionals moving up from London to Scotland as a lower cost centre. As operations were then offshored, those same ops professionals got into relationship management, into data work, into project management, into tech. And then in parallel to that, you've got this really strong technology focus in the universities. So Stephen, I know that we've kind of toured around the tech centres in Glasgow, right? And so that's the conversation that I was having internally. Like if you want to grow the business and we're looking to do that and to create a footprint, Scotland is probably the place to do that. So that's really where it came from. I've actually approved or signed off on 3 hires this week, which means that we've gone from 1 to 12. So a 12-fold increase for Access FinTech Scotland in less than 12 months. So it's been seen and recognised, and we're recruiting across that ecosystem. So I've got relationship managers, front-end developers, back-end developers, client service people. I've got graduates and I've got very experienced people. So if you can come to one location and source all of that, why wouldn't you? So that's kind of the view, and that's how we've got to where we are.
Well, congratulations, Par. I mean, that's terrific from when, that journey you've been on, really. And in this sort of environment of a pandemic, to get that recruitment, terrific sort of story. Or maybe because, particularly that New York sort of parent sort of FinTech experience as well. Janet, with yourself, obviously, what's your being experience? Because you've worked inside some of those bigger organisations trying to get them to change. And part of that is about bringing entrepreneurship and your experience into them. What's your experience been over the last couple of years on that journey?
That's right, Stephen. So, again, my first real experience of seeing fintechs in action and the positive impact they were having was when I was previously at Lloyds Banking Group, and I was leading on a number of different changes, and we were looking at the data and the metrics, and we could see that the footprint we had in terms of market share was being eroded. No amount of work we were doing was quick enough and things like that, till we got to the point whereby we realized that actually, collaboration with some of these organizations and fintechs is the way forward, not necessarily continuing to be in competition and sometimes losing. And this isn't just with that bank, right? It's across the piece of the traditional banks. And again, as Par said, one of the major benefits for Lloyds, essentially, which did have and does have a big footprint in Scotland and the history in Scotland as well, is being able to actually lead on and collaborate with a number of the Scottish fintechs as well to help accelerate its own position in the market in which it competes with other traditional banks. So that was my first real experience, and that's when I first started to realize that actually Scotland's fintech landscape is actually one that really can and is being reckoned with.
That's great, Jan. And Jan, you've mentioned, Paul, you have that word collaborate, really. And because I get asked that question, well, what is it that Scotland's doing that's different? How do you explain, why is it? And sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes I use this kind of environment of collaboration. Is that true? Is that really coming through?
Absolutely. Before I talk about collaboration, though, I want to actually mirror something that Janet said.
Yeah.
My first job was with Lloyds. So Lloyds are great for driving people into technology. So I did product development for Lloyds on the retail side the whole way through university. So it's Lloyds' fault that I'm here as well. So whatever it is that they're doing right. Collaboration, to your actual question, absolutely a key driver. So it's stuff like this. It's everything that you've done with FinTech Scotland, Stephen. It's not common. So being able to get that support, knowing that and you know that I have called you in a panic before and said, Stephen, I've had something go a bit wrong, please find me a contact. Actually knowing that ecosystem exists, that you can be connected with other organizations going through the same thing, is a big deal. So there are fintechs everywhere. Do they speak to each other? Do they play nicely? Is there a neutral party who wants to encourage them to do so? Not so much in other locations. So I do think that that's a massive differentiator where we're based. Absolutely.
That's a great point, Pa, and that's what obviously I've got there. That's the community is referred. When we set up FinTech, we didn't want to be a membership organisation. We didn't want to put any barriers whatsoever. We had the opportunity to create a community, really, of people no cost, choose to be part of because of that learnings, as you mentioned, really. And Janet, have you found, is that collaboration really recognised as a real sort of strength from those larger enterprises that you work with?
Absolutely. And I think one of the great things about Scotland's fintech, landscape is that it punches above its weight consistently, and that ambition is there, and even more so. And for example, I know that Accenture have been doing more work with FinTech Scotland in the fintech space. We have our FinTech Innovation Lab, but we also very much recognize the fact that working and going directly to those already established fintechs as well as the emerging ones isn't the only route for success. Actually, they exist, especially in Scotland, in that close-knit ecosystem that involves the government, that involves the educational institutions like the University of Edinburgh, that involves, for example, our data ambitions around the data-driven initiative. All of that is interconnected, and it's difficult for you to be able to do one without the other. So both from a personal perspective as well as from my professional life, I definitely see the fact that that collaboration comes through and is a strength. So again, with Accenture, whilst we're going to the fintechs, whilst we're going to FinTech Scotland, we're also trying to make inroads on the public sector side of things and in the university and data side of things, because we know it's not a one horse race.
Yeah, great. I'll just switch tacks a little bit. I think we've been living in this challenging environment this last 12 months, nearly 12 months now, isn't it, really? I just pass on what's it meant really for particularly starting up a smaller business in this sort of pandemic environment? Any particular lessons or challenges that have come through that you've been able to overcome?
That's an interesting question. I think because we were relatively small, like when the pandemic started, we were under 60 staff globally.
Right.
And we were all flexible workers anyway. So everybody has their laptop that, you work on the run and kind of do what you need to do. So that was already in our culture. I think the things that have been difficult are we obviously face off against banks, we face off against large institutions, and it wasn't in their culture, to be totally honest with you. So I think one of the challenges has been in an environment where really what you're doing is selling a service. Organizations like to meet you face to face. So I was traveling constantly because they want to look you in the eye as they're agreeing to a deal or being charmed by whatever you're selling them. And moving out of that into a very online based way of working, I think has definitely been a challenge. I don't necessarily think that recruitment has been difficult. The biggest impact for us as an organization was we did delay a Series B fundraising. So but I think that wasn't so much the shift from work to work from home, it was like the volatility of the market and what was actually happening in the world.
Yeah.
So I would say that our last 12 months probably hasn't been very typical, because we were really lucky, and we closed out a Series B run in the middle of last year, and we've been able to grow and continue to evolve. So I think we were well set up at the start, and we've done very well. But it's really watching how the world has changed around us and how we've been able to leverage and insert ourselves into that element of it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Pat. And Janet, what's your take in terms of, has it held back that kind of big and small coming together from your experience? I know you're in with a very large, working inside a very large investment operation at the moment, aren't you? Is it held things back this last 12 months or so?
It is helping indeed, on the basis that a number of these organizations, the larger, traditional organizations, they're being forced to make changes across their whole organization, across their tech stack, and they're being forced to do it quickly, which isn't necessarily in their forte to do in those kinds of organizations. So that actually means that the collaboration side of things, when you are forced to, has happened, and has happened really well, and is continuing to happen as well. So actually going forward, I do see that the necessity is what's going to continue driving these strong relationships.
So in other words,
as well.
Yes.
Sorry, I was going to say, completely echo what Janet's saying. So, and I think we're seeing it across the street. So it's no longer just the big guys are the front runners. It's everybody else who kind of went, hang on a second, we had a lot of fails or a lot of issues or a lot of outages, or the ecosystem was not as robust as we thought it was. And I think we'll continue to see that, Janet, and I'm sure you'll agree. We're seeing changes to offshoring. Is offshoring the right decision, or do we actually utilize more technology to revamp things without being reliant on multiple locations doing processing? Because in March and April, I mean, it wasn't a good time. So if you work in FinTech and you're actually facing off against the financial institutions, March and April were very, very challenging months for those organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's very sort of true. I mean, what you both sort of say, it's kind of accelerated, hasn't it, that demand and the potential adoption. It's still a bit, I do find with some larger enterprises, I still find it's a bit clunky, a bit difficult, and as they think, how do they work with smaller enterprises? But in terms of actually FinTech, I mean, the number of firms in the community, I think when we went into the pandemic, we were at 107, 120 or so, and then to get to the end of the year, 150. Shows that actually new firms and firms coming into Scotland, there's a real growing area there as a key sort of field. I just changed tack to another, and you've touched on this, and I know it's something that's close to your thoughts as well, Janet, and that's around people and skills. So with this development in Scotland, have we got enough skills and the people, and what more can we do? And is there anything there that really needs to sort of step forward more so? I mean, you're going through that recruitment process right now, or have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, I don't think there's any skills that I would fail to find in Scotland. So let's put that out there right now.
Yes.
So they're going to be here somewhere, right? And that's kind of what we've done. So when we started building out our Scotland location, we started off with certain roles, and actually the movement that we've made just in the last 2 months into, okay, we can do true technology hires in Scotland, when typically that's been a protected territory, right? Is a massive deal. And it's because we've been able to demonstrate, no, this skill set exists. And sometimes, so you've kind of alluded to the fact already. So we're partnered with New York. So we work with New Yorkers. New York's a massive city, and they have everything that you could possibly need. So sometimes when you're trying to grow your FinTech organization in a region like Scotland, you almost find yourself saying things that you think are so obvious. Mm-hmm. So I remember, like, I've had conversations with our senior managers about Abertay University. Do you not know? Do you not know what they do there? Do you not know what they do in Strathclyde University? So really kind of promoting that angle. I think that, yeah, definitely all of the skills that you need to set up and run your organization in some shape or form, they're here. In some instances, it might be junior, it might be immature, and you're bringing in graduates who you need to train up and polish, but that's part of the fun of managing people and running a business, right? So I think absolutely, there's so much talent and so many good quality candidates available in Scotland. And as I said, I think at this stage, other than sales, I don't think we have a salesperson in Scotland yet, but every other role in our business, we will now have a representative of that function here in Scotland.
That's really encouraging. It really is. And Jant, we've talked a number of times really about the importance of bringing in greater diversity into, not just FinTech, the financial world. Really, are we really moving forward? And how much of that skills agenda being addressing that question?
We are moving forward in terms of the way we speak and our intentions, but in terms of actions, I'm not sure we are moving at the pace that we need to be moving at. But then on the other side of that, Stephen, this is also something that can't be done quickly if it's to be done right. So although I'm saying we're not moving quickly enough, I do also appreciate that this isn't something that can be rushed. Now, in terms of innovation, inclusion in technology, FinTech specifically in Scotland, inclusion is key. Inclusion drives an increase in productivity. An increase in productivity directly correlates to an increase in innovation, and that increase in innovation correlates to an increase in profitability and GDP and everything else like that. Like that's being proven by studies done by Accenture and a number of other organizations. So that isn't, disputed. I think for me, what I would really like to see embedded properly in more FinTechs within Scotland and the wider ecosystem is, are you creating a place for the people who work for you to feel included? So rather than bringing out these metrics that say, I would like to have X number of women on my leadership, Y number of Black people, X number of people who have neurodiversity, etc. I want to see that the organizations are actually working internally to make sure that when they do get these people in, that they will stay, they will thrive, they will grow, and they will also help to increase that innovation.
That's great. Creating the right environment. It has to be. That's a great point, Jant. You've made that point to me a number of times. Really, that's what's really core. That's what would cause that engine of change. What about just on that people sort of side? And obviously there's a lot. I think it's well over 100,000 people work in financial services in Scotland, and some of those roles. So is that experience helpful in terms of future recruitment? Did you say you've taken on more experienced people recently?
Yeah, I have. And the level of experience can vary. I don't think it's a prerequisite. If you're doing back-end technology, I definitely don't think you have to have come out of a bank ecosystem. But for some roles, it can be helpful. So if you're going to do something client-facing, you need to be able to talk the talk, is the way that I describe it. To some extent, when it's product design or solutioning, again, a bit of hands-on real-life experience can be useful. So I see the opportunities in the FinTech space as coming from kind of two different angles. We can bring in technologists, we can bring in people who are just interested and give them opportunities. Or if you're somebody who has previously worked in financial services and you're looking for a change of pace, a pretty dramatic change of pace in some instances, then there's opportunities in the FinTech sector as well. So I think there's opportunity for both experienced or inexperienced.
Yeah, and Jant, have you got a thought on that? I mean, you've got extensive experience across some really big enterprises, haven't you?
Definitely. I know, especially within Accenture, whereby the nature of my role means every 6 months to a year, I'm moving to a different bank or client or wealth asset manager. I'm working with a number of different people with sometimes as well partner FinTech organizations. And I would say that having that prior financial services knowledge from the retail side of things, and then more so the specialized insurance, definitely helps and is helpful even in the delivery side of things. That's not all that technical. Now, in terms of the landscape and the skills and the knowledge now, as you've already mentioned, we have such a strong base foundation hold in terms of financial services. So yes, we definitely do need to utilize that flow from the larger traditional areas into the FinTechs, as well as having the balance of people bringing in fresh ideas, because that's a great point.
So I was thinking, so if we had say we had this magic wand of things that we could do to improve and build on. We've touched on people and skills, the collaboration, the innovative environment. Pi, is there anything you'd sort of say that actually, if we could do this, it would help us build further and expand sort of further, or encourage more to participate?
I think we're on the right track. So I think, again, what's being done through organisations like FinTech Scotland in terms of drawing attention and interest is really critically important. I think the more firms that come into the region, the better. And the ability of FinTech Scotland to promote those firms and kind of link them together, really, really important as well. I know that there are conversations that happen at universities with students trying to move them into this space. I think that's maybe somewhere where we could do more.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of an area where we could look. When I've been recruiting recently as well, I think it's almost untapped territory for recruiters. I need you to find me someone from a bank, but who wants to come work for a fintech, and it's really not going to be the same for them at all. So I think there's maybe some softer stuff that we could do to try and prepare people, or help people understand, like, what does it mean? What does it mean to work for a fintech? What does that look like? And I'm sure between Accenture, who are gigantic and very long established, to Access FinTech, who are still really small in early days, there's such a range of roles and opportunities that are available to people. I think it's actually more to do with helping the employee market understand what those opportunities are, and grow that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, in terms of reaching out probably through the non-traditional channels and communities to get to people. Jen, what about from your perspective? Is there more that we need to do around help entrepreneurs and businesses as they look to establish themselves?
Definitely. One of my biggest ones is around money, which also happens to sometimes be the more difficult one when it comes to funding. So again, in my research, in conversations with a number of different organizations, and in the media as well, funding is obviously a key driver to being able to continue the good work that fintechs are doing. And I know one of the things that I would like more to do is to look beyond Scotland, essentially. So again, when I say that, a number of people I've spoken to are like, oh, it's really difficult. We're trying to raise our seed funding and it's incredibly difficult, or we've only been able to raise this amount from these people. I've, asked the question also, who have you prospected out to? And it's mainly been VCs within Scotland. Now, I understand we're established in Scotland, we're trying to create this for Scotland, but from the funding perspective, go out to the rest of the UK, go out to the rest of the world to get what you need to continue the good work within Scotland and build it out further as well. So I definitely say, funding money is definitely one that we can work on and support the entrepreneurs that are trying to build these fintechs with that.
Yeah, that's a great point, really, and very much agree. I think across into UK, make those investors in London much more aware about what's happening. And obviously, it's part of our role, and I'm hoping in a couple of weeks' time there'll be a Treasury report coming out about developing fintech across the UK, particularly outside of London. I'm hoping there'll be some proposals in there that we've been contributed to encourage that, but also globally. I've been very fortunate in this role to go a couple of times to New York. And it's it's a huge, New York's bigger than Scotland itself in terms of number of people, but huge opportunities. But if we're going to attract in, I think that mutual benefit of that global connectivity will help, as you say, sort of, Janet, sort of going forward.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Just to add to what Power was saying earlier on as well, around the mindset required, as well as that knowledge and experience. Know, Stephen, I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship, starting up various networks or doing things within your organization to help change it up. So I do think, again, going forward, a way in which we could bridge the gap between people who are traditionally more flexible, adaptable, who can hack it in a fintech which is what it is, compared to, people in banks. If you work, for example, in a major bank, but you have that aptitude of wanting to change things, wanting to make things better really quickly, in small bits at a time. If we can develop that thinking somehow within people who even work in banks, when we're talking about the collaboration between fintechs and the major players in the banking sector as well, it means that the working relationship will even be better, stronger, quicker. And likewise on the fintech side, if somebody's always working in fintech, some kind of education or awareness of how the big banks usually think and work can also help with that relationship management side of things.
It's culture, isn't it? It's like the approach to how you do things. So again, I've been recruiting recently and have found myself saying to candidates in interviews, like, this isn't the same. This isn't office hours. This isn't juggling 1 or 2 priorities. It's juggling 20. So it really takes a certain personality, I think, in some instances to come into this, but it's something that can be learned and taught. And if it's a culture that's enforced and that people kind of grew in their careers, then yeah, absolutely transferable.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's back to that point about environment, that sort of culture, and it's a kind of something you take to, isn't it, really? And so you're right, it's saying that mindset aspect of you're kind of comfortable with the level of ambiguity and complexity that you have to live through, but in a way,
varying degrees. Yes, I'm comfortable.
I mean, some of the things that you do, Pal, with Access FinTech, I mean, it's just mind-blowing, really, about you changing that machinery behind some of the biggest financial companies in the world, effectively, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, it's a very good. Neil, how are we doing on sort of time? I'm just going to check in with you.
Yeah, we're just past half-hour mark, so I think you've covered, obviously, a great deal of content. I think would have gone down very well. We started to get questions in. So if anyone else would like to send through questions, just use the Q&A box at the bottom and we'll start posing those to the panel. Let me start with the first one for you. I think you've mostly answered this one so far, but I think if we kind of tune it a little bit, it could be very interesting. So you're being asked, what skills would you say recruiters in the fintech space would be looking for among candidates? Now, you've kind of broadly covered that, but I wondered if there's opportunity to zero in on some specific areas, some particular technologies or skills that you think are particularly in demand that are being looked for in the market.
I'm going to let Janet go first because I think I've spoken first every time so far. So I'm going to wait. And Janet, on you go.
How kind of you. Thank you. I will, again, on the soft skill side of things, go and confirm the fact that the adaptability and having a certain aptitude in the way you work and the way you do things. Now, we're not saying that you're going to need to work 24 hours of every day. It's just having that mindset of, in fintech organization, it's not the traditional, it's that order is just not there sometimes, and that's fine until it is. In terms of the more technical or hard skills, as we call them, being versed in data is one of the things that I definitely say would be very useful for you. This is data architecture. This is around the various tools as well that we use within data, be that the coding, Ruby, Python, etc. And not just that as well, but cloud technologies. For me, if you can and want to develop in those, I'd also say that the data, cloud technology specifically, as we know with the 3 big ones with Microsoft, Google, and AWS, will set you in a really good stance.
Yeah. Do you think there's a suitable training and education framework to provide candidates of that scale? We've got organizations like Code Clan, for example, who seem to be excellent at producing candidates. Is that the kind of direction you would point people at who want to get into the industry as a good starting point to develop those type of skills?
I'll finish really quickly. Sorry, Pa, you shouldn't let me go first.
Oh no, I'm glad I did.
But no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Neil. Code Clan are one of, I'd say, the premier institutions doing this, not just in Scotland, but UK-wide. And the great thing about them is the relationship that they have with both the big banks as well as the fintech. So they actively always know the exact skills, the exact programming language and things that they are teaching to their cohorts in order to help them secure a job in that fintech or in that bank. So yeah.
Yeah, and they've got a very inspiring leader in Melinda Matthews. who've actually started just before we started FinTech Scotland. So it's done a terrific job, very well respected, really. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Par, just on that sort of skills?
No.
I mean, you covered it quite a lot earlier.
Yeah, and I think Janet's answer there was spot on. And all I would do is reinforce that culture element. For us, it's mindset, and certainly our chief exec, Roy, whenever I speak to him about hires, he always reminds me to go for culture. You can train everything else. You can teach somebody how to push a button. You can explain the trade life cycle to them, but if they don't have the mentality and the ability to really throw themselves into this, that's where people struggle. Yes. So it's, do you want this? Are you willing to put that effort in?
Yeah, exactly. Neil, is there any other key things that you wanted to, as we come to the close of the session, you wanted to ask?
Yes, we're starting to kind of reach the end of the session now. So let me conclude with one last kind of big open-ended question for you guys. So I'm wondering if you have a sense of, you've described what seems to be a particularly large and very successful FinTech ecosystem to date. Do you think we're approaching a point of, how far it can grow? We're reaching the limits of its full scale of potential? Or do you think it's unlimited, that it could keep growing and there's much more potential, much more growth potential to be had? And what would be the key milestones and big events to really accelerate that onto the next levels?
Would you like to go first, Janet?
No, but sure. Let me try and tackle this. Neil, I love difficult questions, and I'm also a politician by trade, so all of this is just filler as I think of my answer. A couple of things. I actually think we're just scratching the surface with this. I say that because a lot of the major fintechs we know now were born out of the 2008 financial crisis, and whilst this isn't the 2008 financial crisis, we are in a place where the economy again is slowing down and needs more stimulation, needs more reboot. Not just that, due to the unfortunate circumstances, a number of people are no longer in their current employment, and they can actually now use that to start working on their ideas. Again, because of this crisis that we see ourselves in, the way we live, the way we operate, the way we spend money and everything else has and continues to change. And that in itself is also going to, again, bring more innovation, more ideas, more fintech starting up to try and solve some of the problems that 2 years ago we didn't know we had with money, but now we realize we do. And then I think on the other side of it as well, if we look at how people are operating, again, we're just scratching the surface. From Mark Logan's report that he did last year with the government, one of the things I really loved in that is that he mentioned that we've come to a place now whereby there are a number of people over the last decade or so who have tried or who have started, company startups in the technology space. For some reason, they haven't succeeded. And these people are now taking the learnings from their own startups and either starting up again in different ventures or putting that knowledge and experience into the already established ones that are there now and really helping to accelerate their growth. So I think in one very short but long-winded answer, I think we're just scratching the surface, and I'm excited.
Yep. Absolutely. I think if you look at also the way in which we're expecting the banks to evolve. So we're saying that bank operations, for example, aren't going to exist in the future the way that they exist now because of technology. In the same way that you've seen banks operations grow, we're now going to see that growth migrate across into the fintech sector, because fintech is going to be the solution to the same challenges. So I totally agree. And to Janet's last point there on people who have potentially tried to do something creative, do a startup, and then have put that effort into somewhere else, I think at least 3 of the CVs that I've reviewed in the last 2 weeks are like young people who have done this. So I ran a business and did this online while I was at uni, and now I'm ready to put that learning somewhere else. One of the guys that we've hired taught himself how to do front-end development during lockdown. So I think the skills and the ambition that we're going to see come out of people having been trapped in their houses for a year will hopefully be really, really encouraging in terms of supporting growth of the sector.
That's a fantastic part. I mean, that hopefully that pent up sort of demand, which is fascinating, really. And I think it's really, I mean, I sort of start off, as I as I started off this session really in thinking there's so much of the financial world that needs to be reinvented. Technology is the enabler for that, but also people make that happen. And there's so many bad experiences or things that could be done better in the way that finances and money and pensions, investment, insurance works. And therefore the demand is there. It's just spotting the problem and then identifying how innovation can change that really. So with that growing demand for that, Neil, across all parts of the economy, not just financial services itself, it could impact in moving to a net zero economy, into health innovation across the whole board. I think there's the potential, if we can galvanize the people behind it, would be my short answer.
Yeah, fabulous, fabulous. And I think when you add in, you know, Scotland's history of invention and innovation, and also history and invention in the financial sector in particular, you know, the intersection of the two just offers just massive potential.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to say a really big sort of thank you. I've had a real privilege in my role of meeting and talking to people like Pardeep and Janet really, and in this community, and it's just one of the most motivating things, even during this lockdown time, really, not a chance to meet people, but just a chance to engage. So a big thank you, if I may say, Neil, for giving this opportunity, but particularly to Pardeep and the work she does with Activist FinTech, and Janet, and the terrific work she's doing in so many different fields of her own business, as well as with Accenture, the many hats that you wear. So hopefully that's met what your audience were looking for, just as a snapshot of what's happening in FinTech in Scotland.